Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker and today is yet another video that was sparked by a comment down below, this time by Nathaniel Morris. This is something that I've thought about doing a video on even before this comment, but it did kind of bring it to my attention again. And that's basically that if you're an NBA franchise and the Boston Celtics call you or you call them about making a trade, just don't do it. Hang up the phone, call somebody else, don't make the deal because you're going to lose. To be clear, this general idea isn't specific to the Danny Ainge era. The Celtics in general have traded well historically, and in Ainge's early years as GM, you can definitely point to a few deals that you could question. But I'm talking about just right now, in the era in which Ainge has been the GM of the team and Brad Stevens has been the coach at the same time. You should never, and I mean never, trade with the Boston Celtics if you're an NBA team. I went back and looked at every single deal the franchise has made since these two joined forces in Boston, which is only a thing because of the wonderful people at Basketball Reference, without which I probably couldn't make this video, so huge shout out to them. And I've picked out 4 specific instances of major trades that show exactly why you should never trade with the Boston Celtics. First up is way back in December of 2014, Stevens' second season in Boston. The Celtics team that had a very interesting group of players. They'd recently traded away Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and were coming off of what turned out to be the worst season of the past decade of the franchise. If you look at the roster of that team, it's a strange group. Fun fact, Brandon Bass actually led the team in win shares that season. But if you look closely, there's one familiar name on there, and that's Rajon Rondo, a player that I'll be doing a feature video on very soon. Anyway, Ainge decided to move on completely from that previous era of Celtics basketball by trading Rondo to the Mavericks in December, along with Dwight Powell in exchange for, most notably, Jae Crowder and the first round pick that became this guy. For the Mavericks, they actually came out of the deal fairly well compared to the other trades I'll be talking about, but not really for the reasons they thought they would. Rondo never really gelled with his new team, and his brief time in Dallas was a complete disaster. The two sides mutually agreed to part ways before their season was even over, with a phony back injury covering up the fact that he basically left the team after being benched in Game 2 of their first round series against the Houston Rockets, an eventual loss in 5 games. Powell, on the other hand, ended up being the best part of the deal for the Mavs and has been a really good role player and energy guy off the bench for them. And now we get to the Celtics. The main draw here obviously was the first round pick they received, but the player they selected with it, whose name I struggled to pronounce, has shown flashes but isn't much of a factor on their current roster. So what turned out to be the huge win in this trade was actually Jae Crowder, a former second round pick who had a solid first 2 seasons with the Mavs, but was playing less than 11 minutes per game for Dallas through 25 games when he was traded to the Celtics. Now, I have a lot of respect for Rick Carlisle as a coach and think he's one of the better ones in the league, but in what's going to be a theme throughout this video, Crowder shined while being coached by Brad Stevens. In his first 2 full seasons in Boston, he saw huge increases in his points per game average, and in his second year, shot nearly 40% from 3-point range, completely different from his earlier averages. His ability to guard and shoot on the wing was extremely valuable in those 2 seasons, in which he played more than 31 minutes a game. But the real reason the Celtics won this trade so heavily comes down the road when Crowder became a key piece in the Kyrie Irving trade. Moving on now to February of 2015, when things really got going for the modern-day Celtics. This was just a few months after the Rondo trade and was another midseason move in Stevens' second year in Boston. It's a bit complicated and you can read the whole thing on screen at the bottom, but essentially the Celtics sent Marcus Thornton and a first-round pick that became Scala Bissiere to the Suns for Isaiah Thomas. IT had just joined the Suns the previous offseason via a sign and trade after an outstanding start to his career with the Kings, considering he was the last pick in the draft in 2011, including averaging 20 points per game in the 2013-14 season, his last in Sacramento. The fit in Phoenix wasn't quite right, however, as the team attempted to put together a unique group led by 3 ball-dominant guards, Thomas, Eric Bledsoe, and Goran Dragic. When that didn't work, the Suns were fine with sending Thomas away for what turned out to be a very small return compared to the value Thomas provided to the Celtics. He finished the season well that year and put in a strong performance in the 2015-16 season as well, helping lead Boston to 40-plus win seasons and a playoff appearance each year. But the 2016-17 season that Isaiah Thomas had with the Boston Celtics was truly something special. He averaged nearly 29 points per game, was one of the best fourth quarter scorers in the league, and was named second team All-NBA. He even fought through a nagging hip injury and the sudden and tragic death of his sister at the end of the season to help lead the team to 53 wins in an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. That hip injury has been a big issue for him ever since, and it could be argued that it lost him a ton of money to fight through it, which I've already detailed in a previous video. But for the Celtics to identify that Thomas could be a go-to scorer for them, get him in a deal that cost them basically nothing, with the exception of the potential for Labissiere to become a solid NBA player, and help turn him into a second-team All-NBA caliber guard is simply incredible, without even mentioning how it benefited the team down the road. Next up is a much more recent deal. In June of 2017, the Celtics decided to trade back from the #1 pick in the draft, which they acquired from the Nets in the Paul Pierce-Kevin Garnett trade, and isn't mentioned in this video only because I talk about it all the time, to go back to number 3 and select Jason Tatum, who Danny Ainge claimed the team would have taken at number 1 had they stayed, but to be fair, of course he's going to say that because it makes him look good. But anyway, the specifics of the deal were that Boston would receive a first-round pick as compensation for moving back 2 spots in the draft, though which pick it would be is a bit complicated. First, the Lakers' 2018 pick would go to the Celtics if it landed between 2 and 5, which it didn't. It ended up being number 10, which the Sixers used on Mikal Bridges, and then traded back to select Zaire Smith. So now it's between 2 options. If the Sacramento Kings' 2019 first-round pick ends up being the first overall, the Sixers would keep that pick and send their own first-rounder to Boston. But if it lands at any other spot, the Celtics would get the Kings pick. Now, I already know that I'm going to get some heat for putting this deal in the video and already saying that Boston won this deal just over a year into the careers of Tatum and Fultz, but that isn't the point. The thing is, the Celtics already won this deal, regardless of how Fultz comes back from his shoulder injury or the yips or whatever it is he's dealing with. Because with how bad the Kings are, it's very likely that the Celtics will get another high lottery pick in this upcoming NBA draft to add even more young talent to their team, maybe even for one of the many highly thought of prospects in the top 5 or so, which means that this trade could end up being Markelle Fultz for Jason Tatum and Zion Williamson or RJ Barrett or Cam Reddish or whoever else you want to pick at the top of the 2019 draft class. Even if Fultz starts to look like a former #1 overall pick sometime soon, that is still an incredible return for the Celtics when you consider how good Tatum is and how good one of those guys they'll pick in the top 5 could end up being. 2 top 5 picks is better than 1, which means the Celtics have already won this deal as well. And that brings us to the last trade, and the reason I saved it for last is obviously because this is in chronological order, but also because most of the pieces in this deal were acquired by the Celtics in trades that I've already previously detailed. Boston sent Jae Crowder, who they got in the Rondo trade, Isaiah Thomas, who they got from the Suns for basically nothing, Ante Zizic, and a 2018 first-round pick they got from the Nets that ended up being Colin Sexton for Kyrie Irving. There's no doubt that Boston won this trade as Sexton and Zizic are the only pieces still remaining on the Cavs from this deal. Thomas struggled in his return from injury, and Cleveland was a complete train wreck in the locker room before the trade deadline, while Crowder never really looked right either and was sent to the Jazz for Rodney Hood. And with that established, that brings me to the biggest point of why you just shouldn't even make a trade with the Celtics. Brad Stevens makes guys better than they've ever been with any other team, which makes them less valuable on a different team than they would be for Boston, which makes their trade pieces seem more valuable than they actually are. I understand that that is a big statement to make, that one coach can make that much of a difference, but the evidence is pretty clear. Thomas was a good player before he got to Boston, but became something else entirely when he was named second team All-NBA, and obviously his hip injury is a big reason why his play has dropped off since, but Stevens certainly has a part to play as well. The same thing goes for Crowder. He was an okay player in Dallas at first, became a great 3-and-D player with the Celtics, and has dropped off in both Cleveland and Utah. And although he has picked it up a bit for the Jazz, he still hasn't come close to what he was for Boston. And then there are guys like Avery Bradley, who wasn't that effective of a player until Stevens came along, but then he started averaging 14 to 15 points a game and was one of the better two-way guards in the East before being traded to Detroit, where he was able to sustain that level of play for a bit, and now to the Clippers, where he clearly hasn't been the same, though I'll admit injuries do have a part to play in that one. But the point is, Stevens clearly has a way of getting more out of guys than most other NBA coaches do, and that makes it extremely difficult to make a fair trade with Boston. To me, this trade history makes it clear. that if you're an NBA franchise, just trade with the other 28 teams around the league. Don't even mess with Boston. Take Danny Ainge's number out of your contacts, delete or block his number, whatever you need to do, just don't trade with the Celtics. Since him and Stevens have come together, they haven't lost a major trade as you saw throughout this video, and I didn't even include the greatest trade of all time in this. That trade they made with the Nets was clearly the biggest part of the rebuild to this point and laid a big part of the foundation. But even without that very large piece of the puzzle in this video, Boston still comes across looking great, to the point that you could argue they are absolutely the future of the league once this current Warriors era is over, especially if that Kings pick ends up in the top 5. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Really quickly, I want to thank all of you that continue to show support to the channel. Since the season has started, the consistent viewership on each and every video has been awesome to see, and it really makes me feel good as a content creator that you guys continue to come back each and every time I put out a video. So truly, thank you guys for the love and support and the level of interaction on the channel. With that said, once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.